And in a couple of seconds, we'll be ready to go. All right.
For attending. This is a series webinar that's run by the Best Practices and Tools Subcommittee. And I'm Ann Jenks. I'm the co-chair of that subcommittee. Looks like we the PERT portal and webinars were paid by a grant from the National Historical Publications and Records Commission. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to remind you that because this is an HPRC grant, we have a match we're required to make, and we really need you to fill out the cost share forms, which Becky will email out after the webinar today. The speaker is Tibaut from Indiana, and he is the Electronic Records Specialist at the Indiana Commission on Public Records. He manages the digital accessions and collaborates on digital projects. He's working on the business case for a digital repository, migration of obsolete media, and it's part of ICPR's initiative to modernize electronic records management. And he's in his current position for 1 year. And Sarah Grimm is the electronic records archivist for the Wisconsin Historical Society, and she's been there since 2010. Her work focuses on electronic state and local records. Also includes working with congressional records, manuscript collections, and newspapers, all of the digital variety, and digital items which happen to cross her path. And she's currently working on the development of a trusted digital repository and developing new workflows for the Historical Society. So, T, it's all yours.
Thank you. I would like to welcome everybody to this webinar on inventory, where two interesting presentations will take place. And I'm glad we're going through the boring one first. So, with regard to Indiana's electronic records inventory, I would like to first say that this is a work in progress, and based on 2013 data at macro level towards a statewide digital repository. And economic considerations are still debated, and options for cost savings are still under exploration. Overall, Indiana is planning with a high sense of urgency, with enough wiggle room for negotiations and for cost modeling that could lead to a significant achievement. The ultimate goal of this inventory is to help with our business case and facilitate access to records through a unified interface. The other reasons why an inventory is needed will be covered by Sarah, though I place this one under the following context. Established an agency in 1979, the Indiana Commission on Public Records has oversight for state and local records. The Commission manages the State Archives, Record Center, Forms Management, Record Management, and Imaging Lab. In 2012, Jim Corridan, the director of the Commission, began the process of developing an electronic records program. Part of that process was conducting an inventory of the electronic records holding by the State Archives and development of calculations to determine the requirements for hosting the files in native, normalized, and accessible copies. This is looking at the feasibility of building a statewide, including state and local government units, digital repository for permanent electronic records. So how did we approach this inventory? First, we had access to and used previous reports on the holdings, including the Indiana Office of Technology's report on data held. IoT is the consolidated IT agency for the executive branch in Indiana. Also, we look at current reports from the Archives Accessions database. We did visits, inspections, recounts, verifications, which is still ongoing. And over the course, we had management review of both the numbers, assumptions, and this is also ongoing. Where we where we use in-house testing and expert opinion estimates of record sizes if digitized. Estimates also have been refined as we find something that's better. So assumptions that guided us through this task. Is scope of the record considered repository. In other words, what we choose to make available to Hoosiers in that repository. A born digital record mine include electronic record media. We also included surrogates from partners like Ancestry, Family Search. We included web pages of government activity, which are listed in archive and included analog records to be digitized for different reasons, and we'll cover those reasons later. And those analog records cover paper, microfilm, audio tapes, and videotapes. Finally, estimated records that might come to us as permanent electronic records from the Indiana Office of Technology's data center, and look at record growth and how much that will be within the time for the assumptions we have. The second assumption was what artifacts will store in our digital repository. On the content, we will have the original records, have a migrated copy, have multiple access copies. Estimate of 1/5 the original size is the size we were taking for access copies, or third for audiovisual, because heavier files. Include in that repository metadata, and some of it will grow over the life of the records, like a trail. And overall, we're looking at the entire repository to replicate it or backed up at least once. Repository system, but if you have both a central repository and a backup, you're looking at paying costs for both. The requirement that guided us are OS, the repository audit and certification track, and the digital preservation capability assessment that you're aware of. Though we kept the number of access copies to 1 for some categories of records such as audio, Indiana is looking at 3 access copies, perhaps in Windows Media Audio and MP3. Assumption is what initial size per category of digitized records. This might be the most boring slides, as I was referring to, because it has a lot of numbers and a lot of stuff to grasp. The column, categories of records. Because we have paper as the base of some type of records, they may be digitized differently based on the content and the look and feel. So we identified 3 kinds. We get records as text. We identify records with discolored background, like older style document, 1812 or anything else in that range. And we also identify paper records as photo. And we have specific criteria for scanning them. At the level, we have the microfilm and 2 types, 16mm microfilm and 35mm microfilms. The visual, we have the video and the audio, and we use some specification for scanning them. The fourth column, we drill down to the unit of measurement. What size of one paper record as at 300 dpi? And we have several tests. For each of these results that you see here, there have been 10 different types of documents that have been scanned, and we have averaged and retained data. So 92 kilobyte for bitonal, 7 byte for grayscale 300 dpi, 98 for color 300, so on and so forth, all the way down. Third column looked at the target volume of record that we will be digitizing for that category. And the following column is the percentage. If you add all of them, the orange side will give you 100%, green side will give you 100%, and the blue also will give you 100%. And the last column will show you the result of the digitations. These are the original size of digitized records based on the percentage that we have targeted. In Sarah's close look at the collections and describing them allows these kind of distinctions that impact on those results. What's the assumption we use? The first option is what percentage of data held with our state could be considered records, and what percentage of that could be considered per record. Based on the Compliance, Governance, and Oversight Council CGOC survey of electronic data record needing to be retained for some time period. If you look at the overall enterprise information, 1% is subject to hold actions, 25% for archive for value, and 5% to retain, and amounting to 1%. We use a similar model as we found based on experience and about records that only 3 to 5% of paper record created in state government ends up at the state archive as permanent records. But we bumped that number up a little bit because the percentage that came up here are for operations. So with 10% of the 31%, for 10 of the entire data held. Looked at how the repository might grow. In other words, the records looked at 10%, 31%, how much of that might be coming more over the years. And based on International Data Corporation's data predictions, data growth will increase tenfold in 7 years at a rate of 40% each year. And that picture in their entire universe. IDC is a market research, advisory, and event services firm for information technology, telecommunication, and consumer technology. Subsidiary of IDG, a global IT and technology company that owns brands such as Chief Information Officer, Chief Security Officer, and others. But what's more important is that IDC and IDG have a reach, an audience of more than 280 million technology buyers in 97 countries. That's how they're able to come up with those numbers. Then will impact results. If I may back here a little bit, we look at assumptions on the scope of records considered, on the object repository, on the size of different categories of records if digitized, on undeclared records that might come to us later on in the repository from data center, and we look at also record growth. The following result I presented will fit the application of storage policy. This is not an exercise in getting the exact size of the repository, to have a good idea of where we might be heading and how to budget for it. The first result that born digital. Only available in the original digital form they were created as. Category, as you see, copies from any different copies all the way down to DVD. And the color that signifies records that appear to us to be obsolete that we migrate. The next column shows the number of that media we have, and the last column shows the total number of megabyte we have received as a session. The level with the total accession that we have stored on our storage area network or a network attached storage, and we add all those up, and that's the number of size of the digital media and records. And we look at the website harvested through it, and we kept that in mind. Though I thought about adding that to the total based on the formula I've used, I decided not to. So we have about sites. If we go to the original my copy, and access copies. If we migrate that, that would be about the same size, so you double it. And on the fourth column, the access copies is just 1/5 of the master. And we can expect the total of born in the repository to be about 12 bytes. Just on surrogates, which are digitized copies of existing analog records we talked about earlier. In preservation-ready format, or TIFF. The formula we use is to just account for preservation-ready master plus access copies. Looking at a total of 8 bytes. Really, that these surrogates will increase as we are planning to digitize a record ourselves in some of our holding we have identified. And the second reason is that some probate records not in our collection will also be digitized and sent to us. As a result, we have covers paper records. Best, better, and good method to change our expectations with the funding. The first line, the first column, or maybe second line, the first column, looked at the total holding of paper records. We have 108,000 cubic feet. That's in 2013. Those numbers have changed. Next, we look at the total number of pages that might come from there. At 3,000 pages per cubic foot, we are under 24 million paper records. We ask ourselves questions to be able to set the right expectation based on that we get. We look at the total number of pages that are vital and should also be digitized. That number turns out to be about 1%. By vital records, we're talking records that are extremely valuable, document citizens' rights, such as birth records, land records, for which making a digital copy on a digital copy will be a good decision. So look at the total number of pages that might be at risk in the next 5 years, and we find that to be 13% for various reasons. And we looked at the total number of pages of record at risk with 10 years. As we take care of the first 5 years, I'm sure we'll have much less left. So that's about 0.9%. At use is a record that they're interested in the holding. And our experience, we find that to be about 17%. All those up, and we get to about 31% of the entire holding of paper is what we should focus on as digitizing. That's where the better and good method comes in. We get funding for 31%, that's about 100 million paper records that we'll digitize. If we get funding for only what's middle pack, that was still better. Any collection in the middle would be better. And if we only get funding for the 0.1% of vital records, that would still be a good thing. And the question we developed earlier, 101 million pages will give out 937 terabytes. Obvious preservation-ready format. And the access copy being 1/5, we're looking at a total size of 1.1 petabyte of records. Also focus on microfilm records, and we name best, better, and good method. Here I'm not going to go into the detail because we're following the same model. It's very similar. Once we get a hold of the holding of microfilm, we have to estimate how many pages of records that will be. And the total will be about 661 million pages of records. And we have looked at what percentage that actually are unique, that are available both microfilm and on paper, and that number to be 70%, focusing on just about 462 million. And use the same method, 30% or 30%, we're focusing about 138 million pages. Calculations we showed earlier, that amounts to about 1.1 petabytes, and as copies about 233 terabytes, and the total size in the repository will be about 1.4 or 1.3 petabytes. The category focus audiovisual records. Because obsolescence, we'll digitize all of it. And as you can see, ranging from Betamax all the way to VHS, the total holdings amount to about 12,000 hours of content. Techniques to digitize them in the column below, we find the initial size of audiovisual record, if we digitize them all, to be 162 terabytes. And because they're a little bit heavier, will be about 1/3 of that, 220 terabytes. And the actual total size we can expect in the repository will be about 888 terabytes. References we use is Mike Casey, head of audiovisual media preserve at IU, and similar specification also found from George Blood Audiovisual that some of you are familiar with. Now, the big our manages 2 petabytes of data, and per the Compliance, Governance, and Oversight Council, 31% of it has record value. As we drill down further, that 10% of that per record will represent permanent records. Here's what we end up with in the second column: about 4 terabytes from the terabytes of data, and the migration copy will be about the same. And should also add the access copies, and that's what we have totally in the repository will be 142 terabytes. That will grow because our current records there, and most agencies are going to digitizing both their processes, and that's going to increase the size. Together, we see that the show earlier had about 142 terabytes of data, and in the 4, the undeclared record will grow by 20 to about 1.6 petabytes. We take, based on our assumption, we take the born digital records plus the paper digitization plus the microfilm that will digitize, and with audio records, we're at 3.28 petabytes. 20, we're projected to be about 4.7 petabytes. And if we replicate with the repository plus our backup, we'll look at petabytes of data to manage. As far as local government, do not know what they have both in the records and in our records. But our hope is to build infrastructure that is available enough to accommodate twice the size of the state of Indiana's digital repository content, to enable any of the 2,355 local government to join and share the cost, and will also allow for growth. Playing with those numbers that we obtain, we start plugging them into some storage options. Roughly about 3 to 5 petabytes of, which is best block estimate that we could hope in the repository until local agencies and local government join. Many petabytes of records require sound and viable options. For storing 5 petabytes for 5 years will cost the following. With our Indiana Office of Technology, we're looking at about $91 million. It's 29 cents a gigabyte per month. Gigabyte is in from there. If we plug it into Amazon Government Cloud, which I think will have the requirement that are good enough for state records, we're at 20 million, and that does include access copies and does not include get and download copies. If we look at other options where we could do it ourselves, we're looking at anywhere from 280,000 to about 60,000, and we have to also manage redundancies, and we have to add management costs. If you have any better options, please let us know. Overall, the obsolescence of audiovisual records, obsolescence of removable media, electronic media, building consortium for state and local government to participate emerge as our priority. I think current records or data will be key to reducing repository size, metadata cost, and improve efficiency through governance. This is the end of Indiana's inventory presentation. Sarah Grimm of Wisconsin will take over and talk about Wisconsin.
Hello.
Yes, my pleasure.
Just as a background, Tibaut and I met out at the Institute in Richmond. At some point time there, our conversation had rolled around to inventories, and a conversation which we continued after the Institute. And we realized we were both using inventories, but had slightly different approaches. Use of an inventory does a really great job at getting really down into the weeds of the digital content that we manage, in with some really long-term prediction about the technology and space we're going to need to hold content. Our use of an electronic records inventory here in Wisconsin is broader, more at a 10,000-foot level, that we're using to make predictions about what we currently have, what we are likely to have, in order to make a case for the investment of resources and technology and people to digital repository, as well as get a consolidated view about what exactly it is that we are doing. So with who we are the Wisconsin Historical Society, and we were founded in 1846, and we're the oldest historical society in the U.S. to receive continuous public funding. As far as state and local records, we are at the end of our records life cycle. We are where the record schedules say delete or send to the State Historical Society. So in terms of the statutory records, the keep forever mode once a collection has been passed on to us. However, outside of those responsibilities, we also maintain manuscript collections, audio collections, maps, image collections, an increasing percentage of which are born digital and we need to preserve, and a fairly extensive film collection, some of which are on dangerously old formats. So all this makes for very interesting days for all of us around here. Inventory. Well, we have many reasons to create our inventory. We started the inventory process a couple of years ago when we were undergoing the process of figuring out how we're going to create, develop, purchase a digital repository. And as part of that, we knew we had to have a really good idea of what we were currently managing and how much we were expecting that to grow in order to make the case for a repository that would include both technical resources and staff. So a formal inventory would provide a really quick way to provide that information regarding our collections in terms of the kind of content and the how much to demonstrate growth and a need for a long-term solution. Inventory was also a really nice tool for helping as an Historical Society management, administrators and staff understand what it is we're doing on the top floor in the back of the archives. While it's fairly easy to relay that information, that you have a lot of stuff, we show people 1,000 boxes or 5,000 boxes. The world can be harder to demonstrate since a gigabyte looks just about the same as a terabyte on a computer screen. People immediately around our area knew we were acquiring significant quantities of digital content. Others at the institutional level only had a vague idea of what that really meant. So the charts and graphs, as T demonstrated in his presentation, really effective tool getting relayed in a way that people can understand, and an inventory would help us produce those. We knew we needed to find the outliers. Digital content that we knew was living with others in the department or in other departments in our organization. While I know immediately what I have in my storage units, I realized that there were other pieces of collections that were not formally included in my world at that time, due to the nature of our institution and traditional workflows and systems that did not necessarily talk to each other. And this is indicative of the informal inventories that tend to exist in organizations. You have your experts in an area, they know what they have in their collections, both electronic and paper, but formally recorded anywhere. We wanted to get that information out of people's heads and centrally located so that it would become institutional knowledge rather than be dependent on specific individuals. So there were things we were actually looking for when we were creating the inventory itself, that we could put numbers around both tracking content and determining future storage and resource needs. And first, probably important in that is needed to be documented and actually exist somewhere, rather than capture the information that people knew about but not have been tracking yet for one reason or another. We also wanted something that would be very usable, a format that could list and sort and report. We want readily accessible to others, so people wouldn't rely on just one or two people to tell them what we have and how much at any one point in time for report planning. We needed it to be scalable so that we could add contents and fields over time as our needs changed. And of course, we needed it to be updatable and easily updatable. To start out with, we had a small team determine a level list of questions we wanted to answer about each collection. Really basic stuff, the information we deal with every day. So we, based what is it, who owns it, what it consists of, where is it right now, very important. How critical is the data, how is it being stored, and what about access? Under each of these questions, we created fields that we felt would adequately capture the information we needed to track for each of these questions. Under the what is it piece, for example, we decided on the title. What is the familiar title for this collection? Pretty basic stuff. For us, it's more logical to track at the collection, not the level, not the item level. That would be way too complicated and take too much time. Description, a brief of what the collection consisted of. So case files from Bayfield County or minutes from the Employee Trust Fund Board. The terms, for us, we identified collections by categories such as state and local and manuscripts because this was often broken up in reports about what we were currently managing and people wanted to know. There's an asterisk here because this was very important for us. We needed to make estimates on digital content we didn't even have yet. Some of our collections, like local probate records being scanned by GSU, are still in progress. Other minutes from a state government agency could grow, but they grow real slowly, and we need that. Most collections are a one-shot deal, and they will never grow in the future, and to know that. So it was going to be very important in order to estimate space requirements for future storage. And the notes, because you always need extra space to write something about the collection that doesn't have a space somewhere else. They are using it currently to track things like accession numbers for complete collections, noting when collections still need work, some problem format file formats, like that. They also wanted to track several associated with our collections, which can be pretty important in terms of metadata and helping to find things later. Original date. That's the date associated with the content of the digital object. Dates, a singular or date range associated with the creation and use of the digital object, and the date received. This was very important to show growth over time. Know it exactly, we could use the institutional knowledge to make a fairly decent guess as to when it arrived. So in our example here on the slide, probate cases, the original was from 1860 to 1865. The date when it was digitized by USG, that was done in 2009, and then we received it from them in 2011. Since we're at the end of a life cycle, we don't need to track any kind of disposition date for things like state records, but that would be pretty important if your institution has record management responsibilities. Digital content may come directly to me from an agency or organization, but it is mostly to come to through someone else, so we try to track the path. Is the department receives that content before it enters my world? Not always the point of entry into our organization. Can arrive in random collection folders, hybrid collections, digital collections from all areas, state records, local records, manuscripts, collections, etc. Responsible staff is the person department with the primary responsibility, most knowledge of the digital item. I often see the digital content, the context back to the larger collection can sometimes be missing for me. So do we really need to save those 10 documents off the floppy, or did it also come in paper format in one of the boxes? I know which department it comes from and my contact point in that area to get everything I need to know in just that collection or not later. The will get out as we develop our workflows. This is kind of one of those fuzzy things that in progress in our institution right now. And then later, internal or external, we do digitize some of our own materials. So we have a contact point to go back to if there's any problem with the content. Get it. Dove. The medium is not essential, but it's actually pretty important. Started this process years ago. Some of the digital content had been fully processed and was sitting on our SAM devices, but others still really needed to be moved off their original transfer media. The extent is also really helpful to note for us. For older items, we found older file formats, which needed extra work. It also gives you a good idea about the how big part of the equation. Is a collection I can deal with in 15 minutes, or is it going to take me a week and a half? Making these two areas helped us to identify how we might want to prioritize projects with limited staff. Older media floppies, for instance, might take precedence over content on a hard drive that could be sitting there for a while. Internal size, and for us to keep this field consistent for reporting purpose, and we chose to translate every collection to gigabytes. We get a combination of the file size field and the date received field from the previous slide in order to quickly create a report in order to show growth over time and demonstrate a need for additional resources. Right now piece. This outliers. We want to track the location of digital content in our inventory since not all of it was currently on the SAM. Some of it was online, offline, some in other systems that would grade it into our repository eventually. So we tried our list of primary locations and the list of all backups and copies, so you knew where that source was. We collect is not all created equal, as Tibaut pointed out. Some of it's born digital, some have copies outside of our organization, some may consist of only a couple of documents, while others are terabytes huge. Some content may be about subjects that no one will ever ask about, and other collections may be a hot topic that we know the public's going to be interested in. So we wanted a way to incorporate a measure of risk and help prioritize our collections, come up with the following three categories to help us do that. One is data criticality, one is business criticality, and one is ownership. The piece is ranked of 1 to 5, with 1 being the most critical and being the least. Digital, number 1 digital, and we have the only. If it's gone forever, and that was a thing. Down to 2, where we have a digital copy, but physical copies are high risk, the audio tapes or the movies that we're speaking of earlier. We have a digital copy, but physical copies exist somewhere else. There may be a paper copy that a local agency still has, but we may have a digital copy of that. So if it disappears, digital, it would just take some time and resources in order to do that. Number 4, we have a digital copy. The digital copies reside elsewhere. A little easier transition if we lose our copy. And if we have a digital copy and we still hold the original physical items. So look on that one. Criticality piece. Is a look at this, measure risk. This is on a scale of 1 to 4 for each of our collections. Number 1 is irrecoverable. This is a thing that if it was lost would put you on the front page of the newspaper, which is in most cases a really bad thing for us. The permanent loss of a digital object, which would result in significant damage to our reputation and have a highly negative public impact. Number 2 would be a major impact, where it's a digital object with a major damage to our reputation or have a major negative impact, or cost replace or loss of revenue if we have it, and require major staff resources to correct the issue. A hacked would be the loss of the digital object would have a minimal damage to our reputation or have more negative public or financial impacts to us, and not take any staff resources to correct. And there's the items that if we lost, it would be really sad, but we could either fix it by pulling it in from someplace else, or we just wouldn't have very many negative impacts should we lose that object. This could only define why we hold something, but they affect what you assign in terms of the criticality. So have a statutory responsibility. Risk of losing it may be higher than something you purchased. Or risk of losing a manuscript from a high-profile collection may be more critical than meeting minutes from an obscure state agency that no one ever requests information about. So the criticality is really based on a measure of all 3 of these items combined. And the numbers you assign are subjective. It's pretty easy to quickly assign numbers to collections at the very high level and making decisions about how they would be handled in a trusted digital repository. And that isn't being stored. Digital content that's less data, standard backup and recovery process apply along with all those other cool OAS standards. And are the items that that you determine don't rank really super high on the criticality scale. You have a digital copy, it's easily replaced. There would be no or low impact if it was gone, either temporarily or permanently. You may want to assign things to a dark archive for items that you hold that must be stored appropriately, but made some extra security. Foreign content that you're statutorily required to hold, for instance. These would be the front page kinds of things that you need to avoid. And you made a field for recovery time. An emergency plan would live inside of this inventory. This is the data needed in the event of a system-wide failure or a catastrophic event. So critical items would necessitate a very low recovery time, as you could take months to recover and make it accessible again without affecting your reputation or the ability to provide resources to the public. We assigned resources in this field for like 1 to 3 weeks for the highly critical items, 2 to 6 months for less or so, 1 year and greater than 1 year. Very broad buckets, but it at least gives you an idea how you may want to treat your items. And piece. We create fields for both data access and restrictions because not all data is created equal. We're tracking how we will provide this information to the public. Some could be actually on an internet, but they will need to come in-house and to our room and view it here. And then any other restrictions that may be on collection due to statutes or PI issues or copyright issues or donor restrictions. Again, it goes back to the risk factor, except now we're tracking that impact on our public image and what happens if we release information that we shouldn't or we release it too early. quite a few things along the way. First is to test your inventory. The fields we decided to collect was really an iterative process. We had to make sure that it worked for different types of genres and formats and collections. And in order to do that, we ran several sample collections through inventory before we really loaded information into it. That's what we needed or didn't need. We fields and tried again. And this actually didn't take us very long, and let's fine-tune the information before we started, very key in making this successful for us. Also where we discovered something about the technology. Pick the right tool. We started out Excel, and really the content is more important than the technology on which we're inventory. We started with what we knew and owned, but that Excel was not quite the right tool, and we discovered this in our testing phase because we fields we just scrolled endlessly, and it was difficult to manage. So we transferred it to Access. This is pretty easy to query, and it helped us create a one-page form, which provided a nice start for a submittal agreement with others. Make sure we were collecting all the information that we wanted to and needed to, in order to eventually process the digital collection. And now, it actually takes a little bit of time. Prepare for the. We knew that at the back of our heads, and actually the items on our SAN took very time to actually get in here and registered and get all the right data collected. It was the outliers and the things that we didn't know about that take time and taking time. This is a work in progress. It is never. We are never expecting this to be done. We started with what we knew, and it didn't take us long to get some reasonable measure of what we had and how fast our collections were growing. We're not aiming for exact number of terabytes or file formats or any of the other factors, but we needed a way to produce very accurate reports of what we had and what we could expect to have. Provided us a way to collect some really important information about the collections that we may not have, since much of this came in initially way back when, without proper workflows and documentation, just because we hadn't implemented that process at that point. So we did the opportunity to really take another look at the materials. As I said, back in 2008, with a plan of actively working toward a digital repository, we knew what we wanted. During that time, we have taken in digital collections. We have taken the proper care of them in terms of accessioning and storage, but some of the information from the collections at a very high level was missing. Needed some additional work prior to going to a formal inventory. So this has been a really nice intermediary step for us. In the inventory and taking a hard look at some of our collections, we realized that some of these needed additional work due to such issues as obsolete file formats that we had not initially had time to work our way through due to limited staff resources and lack of standards at the time. We are now putting those on project plans to take another look and figure out what we're going to do with those collections based on what we know today. As we develop our repository workflows, policies, procedures, the need to review and rework existing collections will diminish. So, this is a really evolving process. And as repositories developed and Brian, I envision that this inventory will evolve into some sort of a precip track mechanism. So as we collect items and get them ready for the repository, we can collect this information, and we should be able to bring the ingest of a collection via XML into a repository. And then the repository itself track most of the information in our completed collections. But I would really like to incorporate some of these fields that we would now into our repository, like data criticality and recovery times, and dates, making sure we have all the dates to help in the overall management of the collections and reporting out on the status of items. So giving you two very different approaches for the electronic records inventory, and we would like to open it up for questions now if you have any. If you want to ask a question, go ahead and type it either into the chat box or Q&A box, and we can see them there. If you want to verbally ask your question, just raise your hand, hit the hand raise button below the participants list.
Becky?
Yes.
Okay, while we're waiting for someone to bubble up with a question, I will remind you that Becky will be sending you an evaluation, which we really would appreciate if you would fill out. And also, you may have gotten the information about the two half-day workshop at the Nagara-Kosa annual meeting in August in DC that we'd really like to see you attend. And there are applications for help with the travel costs. And there are webinars coming up. Topic to be determined, and dues are in July 22nd. Carol Houzanme is going to show us the PERTS portal and how to operate it. So, no questions?
Yeah, it's like there's a couple coming into the Q&A box. Wisconsin, how did you gain intellectual control of your electronic records? We have intellectual control through a variety. It depends on the context. The state and local records, statutorily, we gain control of them. And for the other, a lot of it is the agreements between ourselves and the read them to us. But we don't out there in the public, we don't have intellectual control over.
Can you?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Virginia asked if Indiana Directory of Active Records agencies the estimates. One way we decided to look at it was to just look at the entire data held at the Office of Technology level. And this consolidated, as we mentioned earlier, and for that reason, all I had to do was remove whatever belongs to the state archives as records that is counted towards that data, and from that point, estimate active records. That 31%, we went for 20% of long records. As a result, we were not looking into repository effort. It would be towards long-term retention for permanent records, not the active records. And that's about it. I don't know if I as you as an answer. My pleasure.
So the one from John was for you. What was out there? Oh, see that one. What would I don't see the question. know what was out there. The organization, well, the SAM was pretty easy. And then a lot of it was just institutional knowledge. Knew who were in different areas. We knew might have that would end up in a repository just based on what we have. A couple of manuscript people, we have a local records person, we have an image person who deals a lot with images that come in from a lot of different areas, but a number of them are digital, and we knew that. So it's also getting the information out and people coming to us and saying, oh, this is up in a collection, and what do we want to do with that? So a lot of it is institutional communication as well, getting to understand what it is you're trying to do and getting the change in the flows. To get so we also get duplicate data, and having hybrid collect also have some things that will be electronic data and paper data. And we're sorting through that. In a small enough collection, we can usually pick out are the duplicates. And quite honestly, we tend to keep the paper a lot of times. Our collections, if a floppy comes in, it's on a collection. Most of the very, very large collections, like the government documents, where we know that there are duplicates in both the paper and electronic. We do the best we can to through those, but we always pick that. And just made an institute. We don't have the staff or the resources. There's just two of us that work on state records. So for the monster huge collections, we've just keeping everything. If we receive 2 digital copies of the same item, we'll try to keep the one that seems to be the best term copy.
Well, I think that's a good answer, Sarah. I just wanted to add that if the duplicates are in format, it's hard to tell, because what you have to do is just go through every single page to see if there's anything, or every single record to see if anything is duplicated. However, if the duplicates came in the same format, let's say you have 2 Word documents that are duplicate and there is no change between the two, once you access and you run a checksum, you will realize that you have 2 that match, and now you can tell that those are duplicate. But on that, it's going to be a manual inspection, and that would be tedious if you have a huge collection coming in.
So I have a couple of applications that take even get as far as that before we even do the checksum. We run it through and kind of say, okay, how many duplicates? Because we get out of government agents will send us every single version of the document that they have, and so that takes a good off the top as well.
Well, if any more questions, we're coming up on the hour here, and I want to thank everybody for participating, and don't forget your evaluations and your cost share forms, and we'll see you next month.